And then the Great Recession, the Great Financial Crisis,
Yeah.
as some call it, hit. Obviously, the real estate markets were completely dislocated and disarray. The economy was in shambles. But with any scenario like that, there's opportunities that come arise. So,
All right. Thank you so much for coming to check out another episode of the Stash Cast, where we have interesting conversations with interesting people. The Stash Cast is brought to you by Needle. What if you could use data and analytics to predict real estate transactions before they occur? You can with Needle. Come check it out at Needle, nedl.us to learn more. All right, round two. What I was saying is that we had seen each other maybe a month ago, maybe 2 months ago at this point, at a dinner. Oh, I have Larry Bergman. There's Larry, David Conwill, and Jason Stevenson along for a ride. And what I was saying is that I have known David for a few years now. We worked on a land deal, and I'd been probably calling on you for a little while before that. But I never met you in person. And so we sat down and you're like, hey, Stash. And I was like, oh yeah, hey, how you doing? And I didn't realize until like halfway in the dinner, I was like, oh, that's David. He's my buddy. He's my friend. As I was doing that, I was like, yeah, I heard I think you had shared with me the story of Redwood before. As we were sitting there at dinner, I was like, man, this would make a great podcast appearance, a great podcast guest. And so we have two friends with us to join us today as well. So I figure what I'm interested in this is really just hearing how people came up and found themselves in the position that they're in today. With that, maybe David, if you want to give us a little bit about who you are and what you do, and then we'll maybe go around the room.
excellent. And thanks for having us here. It's a pleasure to be sitting next to my dear friend, Larry Bergman, as well as my dear friend, Jason Stevenson. Thank you for kidnapped Jason to come down to Cincinnati today. He's an honorary Cincinnatian. So yeah, we met on the Mansfield transaction.
Yeah.
And you were a pleasure to work with, super professional, and that turned out to be actually a great deal. So that's in the most, as in the case with most Redwood deals, in the 2+ check mark categories. You'd like for a little background on Redwood? And
yeah, I usually start by saying, because I know who the guests are. Why don't you tell us who you are and what you do?
Okay. So again, I'm David Conwill. I am the vice chairman of Redwood Living, one of the principals. I've really been involved in the organization really since inception through another company called Pride One. That's where I got my start, which is an outstanding real estate development and construction company out of Medina. The quick background, the principals of Pride One met the founder of Redwood Living, Steve Kimmelman, who's the current CEO. They partnered together on the first project, building single-story attached garage apartment communities, product that kind of looks and feels like townhomes. And that project in Akron, Ohio, 95 units, was developed in 2003. It was very successful. That then spawned some additional projects. And in my role back then, I was a development manager, worked on capital and finance at Pride One. I actually kind of got into the role right out of college. That's maybe a longer story, just dating back to when I was in high school. I actually worked in the field, sweeping basements and shoveling things and sanding floor seams and drywall touch-ups, kind of miscellaneous general labor. And that then led into more of an office role when I graduated from the University of Akron. I spent time on development, civil engineering, and eventually finance and capital. Fast forward, partnership group did a handful of deals, and then the Great Recession, the Great Financial Crisis, as some call it, hit. Obviously the real estate markets were completely dislocated and disarray. The economy was in shambles. But with any scenario like that, there's opportunities that come arise. We saw opportunities to acquire really fantastic location sites. A lot of banks were taking back projects from like condo developers, single family developers. And I call it entrepreneurial naivety. We didn't really have a lot of banks that were interested in lending at that time. We're short on equity partners, but we were heavy on entrepreneurial energy. And so we set forth to grow and expand, and really lucked out with finding some amazing sites, phenomenal people. And the next thing, the financial markets came back and caught the wind there and had tailwind and were a lot of fuel and the banks and equity. And from that point, just after the Great Recession to present day, the Redwood organization, we have about 18,000 homes that are CO'd,
That's
built,
amazing.
and another about 4,000 plus or minus that are in various stages of development and construction. Over about 600 employees. We're headquartered in Independence, Ohio. We have Redwood neighborhoods located throughout the Midwest, predominantly Ohio, Michigan, Indiana, and in South and North Carolina, and growing in the state of Illinois. We're in Iowa, Nebraska, and a handful in Kentucky. Company at this point is an outstanding operating platform. We live by our core values, and our core value number one is what's called do one thing really well, which is the laser focus on the one type of asset class. I think that's a summary in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's great. I think that you guys do that one thing really well. The Redwood communities, as I am aware of them, you don't really have amenities. You have a walking path and
We have amenities. It's called
peace and quiet and
and it,
garages.
exactly an attached garage. And on that point, it's a good sort of topic to talk about here. And so often, multifamily developers, they're trying to obfuscate the limitations of the living space, right? But at the end of the day, a typical, and I say this with all due respect,
Sure.
the objective is to maximize density on
Yeah.
most pieces of land. So when you do that, the living space might not be the most attractive and desirable living space. And to make up for those limitations, they install this thing called amenities. What is amenity? Amenity is a clubhouse, a community center, maybe a volleyball net, things that you could probably get in the marketplace in your local community that does it a whole heck of a lot better than a multifamily property manager. At Redwood, we focus on ultimately the living experience where you spend 99.9% of your time.
Yeah.
And for that, we sacrifice density, but ultimately we're delivering to the customer. And you talk about great people in business. Jeff Bezos has said 1,000 times what makes Amazon great and what they focused on in their leadership team meetings and their executive strategies was ultimately the customer. Don't focus on the competition. Don't focus on say Steve Jobs said the same thing. What is best for the customer? And I think that is the mantra at Redwood is what's best for the customer.
I think it's the ultimate compliment to you when people start knocking off your product. We're a Redwood style developer, but then they have other tweaks or maybe they have a clubhouse or something like that. But I think that's the ultimate compliment to somebody like yourself and in your organization.
Yep.
Um, yeah, that's awesome. Thinking about one of the things that I thought was really interesting that you shared was how the company grew from the inception to where it is today. Can you maybe talk a little bit about your role in building Redwood into what it is today?
Okay, sure. First off, I'm a team builder, and success at Redwood is a culmination of a lot of people's efforts, including the gentleman to my right here, Mr. Larry Bergman, who was an early on supporter, looking for sites and helping us raise capital. If it wasn't for people like Larry and a lot of others, Redwood wouldn't, I don't think, be where it's at today. I'll answer your question, yes, about what my role. I was one of the, I guess, like the energizer bunny. There's so many. We love the business origin story. Jason and I, we were talking about that this morning. These stories, which are interesting because they're usually the confluence of an extraordinary person or extraordinary effort crossed with luck and circumstance and other people and opportunities. And those all things they intersect, and occasionally you capture this lightning in a bottle, which becomes a successful company. I was fortunate to be surrounded by some amazing people, the founders of Pride One, a guy by the name of Doug Lair, Jerry Fumey, Pat Finley. These are three individuals that started the company that I started at. They had partnerships and investors in a lot of their deals that were legendary real estate people, especially in the Cleveland market. I learned so much in the world of both in the field with construction, development, as well as finance. Um, some of the guys were appraisers by trade. And then the founder of Redwood, who was the most amazing focus on simplicity and doing one thing really well. That's where the kind of the core value comes from. So I had all these great people around me that cultivated and got me to where I was at. My role was in the beginning stages was finding sites, growing. Eventually that kind of turned into hiring people and recruiting. I explain it like this. It all began with finding great sites.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm decent at finding great sites. I've got a decent track record. And then as you continue to grow and have success, it moves into recruiting and hiring great people. And that's, I think, the key in scaling an organization is because you ultimately can only do so much as an individual contributor. I think my primary roles were, you could break it down into a few buckets. On the real estate side, led that effort. Eventually, the kind of the capital stack, raising equity, working with the banks, and then eventually did a lot of the recruiting, laying out the strategic planning. My role at Redwood was president at the beginning stages, 2009, 2010, and my partner Steve Killman was the CEO. Then we did a little reorganization. Steve moved into a chairman role. I stepped into a CEO for a few years. Steve had a desire to come back in. I welcomed him back in, open arms. And I say to people all the time, the best job in America is executive vice chairman because you get to work on the capital stack strategy, but you're not in the day-to-day minutia that can sometimes bog you down. A lot of the good, not so much of the stress that goes along with being involved in a corporate setting.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's great. I think that gives us a good segue to talk with our other folks today. Larry, I know you by name and reputation since I've been here. You've always been a prominent figure here in local Cincinnati real estate. So maybe if you could give us an idea of who you are and what you do.
I'm Larry Bergman with NAI Bergman, and our family business, with is now in the fifth generation, invests in real estate. We have a brokerage company. We have property management. We do full service for real estate, and we just look for opportunities. And because our name is associated with our business, we want to assure that our reputation's strong. And we align ourselves with good people like you and David, and that's really who we are.
I think you're tremendously underselling yourself, but that's good.
Larry does a lot more than what he just said. He's actually one of the top NAI brokers in the world. I think he served in leadership roles at NAI International over the last 20, 30 years. There's nobody in Cincinnati that Larry doesn't know. And there's probably and those people that he does know, he'd take the shirt off his back and give it to that person if it meant helping them out. Yeah, Larry is extremely well connected, a mover and shaker in Cincinnati and really the greater region. So you definitely undersold yourself.
Well,
so
frankly, I'm one of the larger real estate people by physical weight. That's my role. But David is his company I got started with about 20 years ago. I met David and started to develop a friendship with him, and our friendship led to doing deals together. And most recently, we're involved in two projects in Cincinnati. But it's exciting, and I'm looking forward to continually grow with him. As Stash, you should.
Yeah,
It's terrific.
that's why we're here, among other things. Larry, I'm curious, you've done some, I think, legendary deals, one of which, and if you're willing to talk about it, I'd love to hear it, but you guys orchestrated the sale of all of these Cincinnati public schools back during the Great Recession. How did you get that deal? Like, see, it seems like a crazy thing to happen, timing and deal wise. Can you share about that?
There was a request by the Cincinnati Public Schools, and they approached all the brokerage houses to be interviewed, and they believed me that I could execute a sale of about 30 schools at one time. And for some reason, it actually worked, but it was pretty pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
Even I'm shocked that we were successful.
Yeah. It must have been a really hectic transaction.
It was a hectic transaction, but it was rewarding. And I think the sales that what I was explaining is whatever we get for the schools, whoever buys it's going to bring new value to the asset.
Yeah.
And that asset, the redevelopment of that asset brings more tax dollars, which benefit the schools.
Mm-hmm.
So we shouldn't really focus on a broker opinion of value or what we think it's worth. We should focus on what the next 30 years will generate on a property.
Yeah.
And they agreed with me. And through that approach, I said, why don't we find out what the real value is through a auction process? Because that, in essence, establishes the market value.
Yeah.
And that's how we earned that transaction.
Yeah. And I think for the most part, a lot of those have transitioned. There's still a few stragglers out there.
Correct.
Yeah, I think for the most part, reactivating, because some of these old school buildings are just beautiful. I have one of them on the market right now. And
they did a great job on that.
They really did. It's super cool. They left some of the blackboards intact, and it's really cool seeing an old school that was reactivated into 40 units. So
great. It's a miracle. It's really remarkable. Just the amount of gum that's accumulated underneath the sills and everything. It's remarkable.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. Jason, this is our first time meeting. So usually I have an idea of who the guests are, but if you could, can you give us an idea of who you are and what you do and why these two fine gentlemen thought it good to have you tag along?
I can only give you part of that answer. I don't really know why either of these guys are spending any time with me, let alone thought it would be a good idea to. I'm an entrepreneur by trade. I've got a background in finance and insurance. I own a handful of different companies, and we do a wide variety of different things. We raise capital. We're getting into the commercial real estate space a little more actively, which is largely how my interaction with Dave and others have come about. But I'm in the retail space. I'm in franchising. I have hundreds of locations across hair salons and pizza shops, things like that around the U.S. We own a company called Core Support Partners. We do all kinds of support for small businesses, IT, payroll, bookkeeping. I'm in the insurance business, and we're raising money for capital projects like hotels. We've got a number of hotel deals popping up around the U.S. and other commercial real estate, among other things.
Nice. Awesome. Maybe we could take an opportunity to go around the table and talk about some of maybe the best deals that you guys have done, and then some of the most important or valuable lessons that you've learned through your career. And then maybe any advice that you'd give to maybe even new or established folks in the industry.
Maybe I'll kick it off. My best deals through 223 start and begin with Redwood.
Yeah.
And has been tremendously successful. Very blessed to be part of that. And I think the biggest advice, most received advice that I could give is the focus. And I think oftentimes, especially in commercial real estate, we all like to be inventors. We want to reinvent the wheel and create a new project, a new vision, and scratch that itch that is the creative side. And that's good. Don't mean to throw water on that desire, but I do, if I'm giving advice to Jason or you, Stash, or Larry, or any of my friends and partners, there's only so much time in the day. And different people have different skill sets and different expertise in different areas. And when you try to be the jack of all, you're jack of none, as they say. I, along with Jason, am an entrepreneur in my core, investing in various other businesses and ventures, different industries. It's exciting. It's fun. Hope to make money along with making a positive impact. But at the end of the day, if you really want to do well, you really need to focus, laser focus, and make sure that you execute, implement.
Yeah.
And because there's nothing worse than doing mediocre on a handful of things. And you're missing out on the opportunity to do great things for maybe a handful of things.
Yeah. Sometimes I see people jump from one discipline to another, and maybe they'll hit a home run here and there by chance, but you have a much better, from what I've seen, you have a much better opportunity to succeed if you're focusing on a strict vertical. Larry, how about you?
What was the question?
So the question or thought, and you can answer any part of this, is you're a veteran, respected. What are some of your best deals that you've done? And then also, what advice would you give to new and or established people within the industry that have been successful for you?
My best deals have always involved partnerships. And what I do is I embrace building relationships with folks. When I am involved in development, any type of real estate, I'm usually dealing with folks that know me, that are my friends. And we work as a team to be successful because we get all the strengths within a group. Yes, you divide up your interests.
Yeah.
But my feeling is if I own 2% and I have 50 deals, I have 100%. So
Yeah.
you got to do a lot of things. And that's what I do. That's my success. But for someone in our industry,
Yeah.
You have to have integrity. You have to say what you're going to do and do it.
Yeah.
And you need to keep people up to date on what's going on and socialize.
Yeah.
And it's not rocket science. If you ask me details, I'm not the detail guy.
You and me both. Yeah.
At least one other guy here who doesn't know anything about any detail.
At least two other guys.
At least one.
Yeah.
One
And frankly, you have to have, if you were a very average student in school,
Yeah.
and you suffer from ADD, you're going to be very successful.
Yeah. I've found that to be true. Jason, what do you think?
I guess I'm a little more philosophical than the other two guys in the sense that if I had to pick a best deal, you'd have to help me define best. I suppose in most contexts, it means easiest, fastest, provided the most money. I'm not really sure. And this sort of dovetails into the advice I might give somebody who's younger trying to come up in the world. You've got to define what's good, what's great, what matters to you, what's important to you. To me, money, which is the basic sort of measuring stick for most people, is only one of the things on my list of measuring sticks. And I don't mean to suggest that the other two have simplistic views on this, but for me, time is as valuable to me as money. Autonomy is as valuable to me as money. And in a number of cases, I've got deals that gave me more time. I've got deals that gave me more autonomy. And in many cases, the backbone of that time and autonomy were money. So don't misunderstand me about whether or not money's important in deal making. I think it is, but so you'd have to help me define what's good or what's my best deal by how I would define best. And that isn't to be too nebulous or obtuse. It is to say that I've got some deals that made me a lot of money that I wouldn't really put up there as particularly exciting or revolutionary somehow, and vice versa. Some things that I did that didn't really make me that much money, but gave me 20 hours a week back, for example. Really, as dovetails, as I mentioned, into the concept of what would you give somebody younger coming up in any business, really advice-wise, I would ask them to close their eyes and look at themselves in 20 or 30 years and figure out who they want to be when they grow up. For me, took me 10 or 15 professional years to realize that I wanted, more than anything, the flexibility on a day-to-day basis to be whoever I wanted to be today, meaning not go to work, get on an airplane and go someplace, spend time with my kids, whatever it is I wanted to do. And I can tell you that 85 to 95% of that time, I want to get up and go to work. It's what I like to do. It's what I want to do. Dave and I joke about being deal junkies. I like to be in a business environment, but I didn't want to be dependent on a singular source of income. And I didn't want to be dependent on a particular boss or industry or a particular economic concern, right? I didn't want to be dependent on any one particular thing. So when I closed my eyes and saw my future, the ideal perfect future me, the ideal perfect future me was autonomous and not dependent on any particular or singular source of income, any particular or singular boss, or any particular or singular client, et cetera. And so I chose ultimately, strategically and tactically, when it was required, to diversify the way that I invest, diversify the way that I earn an income, diversify the way that I spend and make money ultimately. And so that's what was right for me. But that includes flip side, which is risk and killing yourself for a long time. In many cases, Dave and I talk about suffering as an endearing quality for somebody, because at some rate, it takes a little bit of that in order to get where you want to be generally. In as much as that's the case, if you want me to underline what's the advice, it's to stop what you're doing for a minute and figure out who you really want to be and work backward about where you're going to invest your time and your energy and your effort and your money. Because most of us, myself included, get out of school or start in a business and do what they're told and put their head down and hope they, quote, succeed. Typically, succeed means make more money next year than last year, right? It's a very simplistic definition. The fact is that that's not all there is to it. I want to ride a horse in Montana in 10 years and not think and put my phone in my cabin and never see it again, right?
Yeah.
That isn't just about money, right? That's about having obligations managed. That's about having a team that handles your day-to-day responsibilities. That's about having a good family life. It's about a lot of other things, right? It isn't just money or deals. And so maybe it's a long-winded way to say you really have to sit back and think about who you want to be and what you want your life to look like and work backward, and so that you're in a profession or that you design your professional life around who and what you really want to be, as opposed to just how do I do the next deal better or how do I make more money.
Yeah, that's fair. That's a great perspective. So how did you go about doing that then for yourself?
I suffered a lot. Dave and I had a conversation earlier today about the value of suffering. I came out of school like a lot of people. I'm in my early 40s, and I came out of school kind of right at the beginning at some rate of one of the early 2000 recessionary periods. There weren't a lot of jobs, and so I went and did whatever I could do. And I realized that I didn't really know who I wanted to be or what I wanted to do. I needed to pay my bills, and so I went and got whatever job I could. And I found my way into finance, and I found my way into ultimately working for other people who incidentally gave me lots of tools and lots of insight into the way the world worked. It took me one or two pretty substantial failures and at least a decade to find in myself on my own the fact that I needed to step back and think about who I really wanted to be, because the thing I had been doing, which was just working my tail off and working, in my case, for somebody else, and selling, which is a big part of most jobs, whether you think you're in sales or not, everybody sells something. That goes for you, HR team. You sell to somebody, believe me.
Sounds like there's a conversation with HR recently or upcoming.
There's some people think they don't sell to anybody, and I differ in that opinion. In any case, I was out selling and beat my head against the wall. And I said, the only thing I get for doing a better job selling is the opportunity to do more selling. And there's nothing wrong with selling, except that if you don't want to do that, you'll get yourself pot committed time and energy wise into an environment that may or may not be the way you want to live your life. And so after a handful of failures and some heartfelt talks with myself, I really identified what it is I really wanted. What is it that made me tick? And I took difficult, time-consuming, expensive, risky steps ultimately to ensure that I wasn't, in my case, dependent on any one thing, or that I wasn't adherent or indebted to any one thing. I wanted a diversity because I'd had a handful of all-in, pot full of my chips kind of experiences that didn't go well, and you only need one or two of those to realize that maybe you could do well with diversifying your income. It's my own experience, which is not contrary to Dave's, where he suggests, say, get really good at one thing. I don't disagree with that. But for me, it was my own personal demand was to have income generate from a variety of places and to not have dependence on any one thing. And so I took steps. I bought some small real estate. I invested in a pizza franchise business, which I still hold. I ultimately went out and bought a bunch of hair salons. I tried to pick wisely where I invested time and money. And last 10 or 12, maybe 15 years, I've diversified my own portfolio to the point where I can be here today, and people do a lot of the day-to-day work in a lot of those environments. And I get to work on those businesses and those opportunities strategically, as opposed to being in the weeds and tactical, which is where I didn't want to be. And
grinding.
Yeah, that's right.
And may I interject?
Please.
You know, what I'd be interested in, may I ask the question? Okay.
Yeah.
I'd actually would love for you to talk a little bit more about what got you into the hotel business, the vision behind the Legacy Medina Hotel project. We're here in the Cincinnati market. I'm very proud and excited to be an investor in the project, and I think it's a very fascinating story, and it would be fascinating for your listeners. So
Love it. Yeah.
Thank you for that. I guess we'll see whether it's interesting or not. But the Legacy Hotel is a project that's under shovel here in the next month or so, and it's a Marriott tribute product that will be in a small community in Medina, Ohio. Medina, Ohio is a Norman Rockwellian looking suburban community. So imagine a Victorian square where the snow always falls and it's pretty, and we have festivals and all kinds of stuff around the square. You can see that in your head probably. I grew up there, and my family's been in that community for 140, maybe 160 years, and have been around for a long time. So it's really in my blood, Medina, Ohio.
Yeah.
And I was not in commercial real estate until one day I was. And to Dave's point, it is a unique and different than usual story. The original developer and person that put a lot of time and energy into making the concept of the Legacy Hotel in Medina possible, his name is Jim Gershbacher, got this project to that name.
Yeah.
How about that? Right? Small world. So Jim's a Medina guy too. And Jim, he's older now, probably close to 80, if not 80. And
I know Troy.
He's an investor in our project and a good friend and a partner of mine on a handful of things.
Yeah. Seems to be a great guy.
Yeah. Yeah. He seems to be a great guy.
He's the nephew of Jim.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
Okay.
That's right. In any case, Jim came to me and said, "Hey, I've never raised money for a project like this, and I've got a company called Autonomy Capital that's in the process of raising money for a variety of different deals, and we raise money for things." I didn't mention it before, but so Jim came to me and said, "Hey, never raised money in this kind of way. I've always been 2 or 3 partners throw money into an LLC and we do a deal, but we've got to raise $8 or $10 million, and this is a complex deal, and I'm not really entirely sure how to do that, and would you help, and are you interested, and so on." And we got to talking, and I was really interested and enamored with most of the project. And after we were done with our conversation, I asked him for his origin story for this particular deal, and ultimately it came about that it took 5 years to make this possible, but it's going to take 10 more to make it successful. And Jim's close to 80, if not 80 years old, and he said, "If somebody buy it, I'd sell it." And that was all I needed to hear.
So that's how you got into commercial real estate.
So that's how I got into the hotel business. I acquired the rights to the project. I acquired the property from Jim. He stayed on and been a great advisor to us. But yeah, and then we manipulated the project a little bit to do a little more than it was going to originally do with event space. And there's 4 or 5 different points of food and beverage points of sale and so on. But it is going to be, to Dave's point, it is not just a math equation. It's a really unique project in the sense that it's a community-driven project. That isn't to say there isn't any good math, because it certainly has to be to generate activity from investors and confidence from a bank and everything else, especially in an interest rate environment where your returns have to be better than they may have had to be over the last few years in order to commit the same kind of return. So it's a good math equation. But all of the money has been raised locally, all of it, Medina, Ohio, effectively. All of it. The folks that are going to invest in this project are considered founders. They're going to have a commemorative element to the project themselves. The community is going to feel like it owns this particular hotel. The other projects are mostly math equations. You raise money from anybody who's interested in giving it to you, and you make sure that you give them returns and you treat them the right way, and you're professional and you adhere to the laws and rules and regulations and your PPM and everything else. This is all of that plus a really unique and special underlying community interest that is, to a large extent, I think, one of a kind. And I'm really proud of that. I renamed the project The Legacy because it will be a legacy project, not just for the community, but for all of those founders that have agreed to participate, because for many years to come, that building's going to stand and people will have their weddings there, and they'll go there for dinner when it's their anniversary, and they'll take their grandkids a Christmas presentation that gets done in the lobby and everything else. And they're going to be able to look over there and say, "Look, there's Grandpa's name on the wall," that kind of thing. And I think that's pretty special and different than, no offense to Hampton, but investing in a Hampton by the highway, right? Those are good math equations. We like those. This is a little different.
Yeah, there's a place for those when you're tired and you find yourself in some far-flung town or city, you need a place to stay.
Hey, I've stayed in many Hamptons. I'm investing in Hamptons. I like Hampton Inn, but this is not that. But largely, those are business transactions. This is uniquely both an emotional, community-driven legacy for individuals in a community and a business investment. And it's not often, I don't think, you get an opportunity to participate in something that is both. And that was pretty special to be able to quarterback.
So is it a ground up project, or is it historic renovation? Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Sure. We're in a historical district. We're managed by that proxy naturally. We've got 3 buildings on a handful of parcels that we're going to undergo demolition. We will go ground up ultimately on a site that's going to undergo some demolition for the next few months, but it'll be ground up and it'll be in the style of the buildings that are there. This square is, like I said, like Norman Rockwell and 1880s construction. And so the building will fit in. And we've got a National Register of Historic Places building on site that we're saving. It was an interurban railroad ticket booth. We're going to make it the valet ticket booth so that it continues still to give out tickets, right? 100 years on, it's still giving out tickets. I think that's cool. And so anyway, it's going to be 78 rooms. It's going to have a 225 probably person event center, rooftop bar, restaurant, fine dining, Italian steakhouse restaurant, a variety of other amenities that are going to make it a really cool place to go, whether you're going to sleep there or not, which I thought was pretty important for our particular community.
Yeah, it sounds like you're really making a destination and pride of ownership for all the locals as well.
I think it'll be pride of ownership whether you own it or not. I think the big events in the town are going to happen there. I think when you go have a nice thing, you're going to have it. You're going to think of going there. When you've got somebody from out of town and you want to show them what Medina is about, you're going to naturally go there. And as a result, it's a great investment and a great math equation with a really personal bonus.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome.
And Medina being the county seat.
That's right.
I think the draw, and of course, the quality of the hotel, the branding is going to be arguably a step above, with all due respect to the other brands in Medina County. For businesses, demand drivers within the county, even maybe a large extent Northeast Ohio, I do think that people will seek this out because of the charm that you have in Medina Square, the amenities with the steakhouse, and still a 5-minute quick drive to I-71. It is really a neat sort of transformative. And I know, Stash, you from a real estate perspective, you're looking for interesting projects and creative approaches to solving problems in the marketplace. And I think this is something that we might want to come back in a couple of years once we go vertical and we have maybe some operational activity to really speak on how it's living and stuff like that. I think it might be an interesting case study that your listeners might enjoy.
Yeah, I'd love that. That would be great.
I actually recommend that everyone plan to book their reservations for the hotel, because Medina has the Buzzard celebration every year.
We do. And it's a big deal.
You have to make sure that you get your reservations in early.
Right.
They'll fill up for the next 20 years. It's important to see it.
We're known for a handful of things. I appreciate you bringing up the Buzzards.
It's a one-day celebration.
It is,
I think it's in the 67th year.
It could be. I know it's been around a really long time. I went to it as a kid, and it's just down the road in Hinckley. That's right.
So what is the Buzzard celebration? For those of us, I know I would know what it is, but why don't you tell everybody else what it is?
It's car salesman. I'm only teasing.
Well,
that I'm teasing about.
Yeah,
I do like car sales.
Well, the Buzzard, every year they come back to this. Hinckley is a town inside of Medina County, which is just proximate to where the hotel will be. And every year, buzzards, right? They come back to roost at this one place. And it's unique. That doesn't happen in every place. Buzzards are scavengers, as people know. It isn't like we bait them or anything morbid, but they come back every year, and there's this weekend generally that they can predict every year that the buzzards will come back to that particular area, and they're in the trees and they're all over the place all of a sudden in that spot. And so for many years, you have something built out of that event. And there's a biker bar in town called Buzzard's Roost, and things like that obviously took advantage of the opportunity.
Yeah. No.
Well, and ironically, Jason's the Buzzard Roost. So I was going to opine on that. So back to my Pride One days when I was working in the field, there was a job site that was right down the road from the Buzzard Roost.
Yeah, there you go.
And that was the hole in the wall dive bar that we would frequent on Fridays with the painters. I remember it was Painter Dave, and we'd go for some libations after a hard week worth of work. Good times there.
Listen, commercial real estate and entrepreneurship are as much about cold beers with Painter Dave as they are about boardroom deals with big money. It's one of the things people
have to be able to bridge the trades and the financiers to be successful at it.
When you say trades and financiers, that's a pretty real estate specific example. I'm not being critical, but in any business, frankly, there's the trades and the financiers and a lot of in between. And so, the capacity of somebody to really manage in any of those environments will help them be successful, to amalgamate themselves and endear themselves and be genuine in any of those environments. To drink beer in the Buzzard's Roost or to be in the boardroom and talk to a finance person is an extremely valuable skill set for anybody with an eye on uncommon success. Larry referenced it before. If you had ADD and were a mediocre student, you figured out how to fit in where you needed to, right? That kind of skill set will treat any entrepreneur in commercial real estate or anywhere else just as much as almost any other particular skill set. Getting along with people and reading them and being likable, and just some really basic human skills that you do learn when you're
True.
only so it's cool.
Yeah.
Or aren't very tall, or whatever you've got where you've got to compensate. That one might be a little personal, but whatever you've got where you've got to compensate for it, you learn ultimately, I think, how to get along in a lot of environments, and it'll serve anybody well in my mind.
I'm curious. So I mentioned at the top that Stashcast is brought to you by Needle. Needle is a startup I'm a partner in, founding partner. And the hypothesis behind it was, what if you could use data and analytics to help predict real estate transactions before they occur? And that's what we're doing. We're about 45% accurate right now. We're getting ready to roll it out into the market. But I'm curious to hear each one of your takes on, I guess, the role of technology and prop tech in your practices, and maybe how you've seen it change and evolve over your careers.
I'll take this first. That's all right, Larry.
Absolutely.
You want to tackle the technology question?
No, I know very little about technology. I just started to figure out how to work our fax machine.
I see you've got your iPhone over there, so you got that.
Okay.
Oh, Larry, don't make me laugh. I'm trying to focus here. So so real estate, general rule of thumb, is on the slower adoptive curve of technology across multiple industries. So you got the early adopters, you got the slow adopters, the late adopters, you got the never adopters, different industries.
I remember one time I got an email from a guy, or no, I sent him an email. He printed it out. He wrote a counter on it and then faxed it back to me.
There you go. That would be the epitome of kind of the real estate
Never adopter
technology.
Yeah, never adopter.
And then what I would say over the last probably 5 years plus or minus, there's been a litany of advances in real estate tech, prop tech. There's some really super smart people that are out there looking to make investments. The smart at the company, but it's in multifamily space. Escapes me, I apologize. But from Redwood's perspective, we always like to be on the front end of that. In fact, I think we've gotten into some user groups with like already being one of the largest multifamily operating systems, because we want to try to help them find solutions. At the end of the day, that's what technology is all about. It's not just to make the IT department to be endless. And because a wise person once said, you could probably spend, in terms of setting annual budgets, you could probably spend infinite amount of money on both marketing and IT. You could completely empty out the vault. And on any given company, maybe the largest tech companies, the Googles of the world, they probably won't run out of money anytime soon, but certainly real estate companies. So you have to be measured and disciplined and find the right, places to invest and to adopt. I know that we're doing the smart tour, self-guided touring. We're looking to create.
Is that just a Matterport, or is it something more than that?
So the self-guided touring in the Redwood world is the ability for a prospective customer to visit and do a tour in a Redwood model, for their information to be submitted and a record of that, and then enabling for follow-up and communication. It involves a little bit of hardware, obviously a lock system to
literally self-guided.
a self-guided tour.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Yeah. So in Redwood, and this is the advent of the single family for rent, SFR.
Yeah.
Build to rent industry that Redwood would be under that umbrella. Technology is imperative, because at the end of the day, back to what I was saying earlier on about density, and when in order to make the numbers pencil and have property management and spread those costs that are traditionally part of the operating mode, when you have, whether it's in the single family world where you have scattered homes throughout the area, in the Redwood world where it's just more of a low density and a singular site, being able to utilize and leverage that technology to reduce costs, it's imperative, or else you won't survive. I think we believe we're a leading technology. We go to a lot of meetings. We like to have a lot of discussions. We beta test, and ultimately we do have a multitude of systems that we are adopting, implementing, and they are driving value, producing results. You could follow up with any more specifics, but
I'm thinking there's probably all these different electronic systems that you're in tune with, but have you also seen advances in like materials and all that too, as you've successfully built
with the
projects?
construction process?
Yeah.
That's a great question. And Larry actually sent an email this morning with a video of 3D printed homes. Not really. There's certainly technology and just in terms of efficiency, budgeting, schedulers, using technology to drive a more efficient, construction process from a management perspective, the physical building of buildings in the field. At the end of the day, we're still buying 2x4s and drywall, pouring concrete, doing a lot of the same things. I know there's some really interesting companies out there that are beta testing, setting up, just still not yet, at least from our perspective, cost effective. It may be coming when you see companies like Lennar Homes that's starting to do three-dimensional or 3D printed homes. That's one of the biggest home builders in the country that's starting to, but at the end of the day, it's still, it's funny to talk about technology and real estate in the virtual world during COVID, when a lot of investments in crypto and collections and people were buying virtual real estate and things like that. You talk about like, utilizing technology. And so, yeah, you can buy the deed to the virtual real estate above, it was like Michael Jordan's home residence. And I says, like, you can buy, like, it's a deed. It's a virtual deed to Michael Jordan's real estate in Florida.
His airspace.
Yeah. But it's not even airspace. It's pretend space. And people were buying that Stash. And there was a marketplace.
Yeah.
Millions and maybe even billions of dollars of, at the day, end of the day, we all know the commentary from Jamie Dimon, a lot of other Charlie Munger, some of this crypto is rat poison and some of the things like that they talk about. And it's about technology and real estate. And someday Larry's going to be brokering virtual leasing space to.
So tell us about Needle. How would I use it?
That's great.
Oh, thanks, Larry.
Yeah, perfect.
The idea came about as I was doing my brokerage prospecting. And what I found was that if you've got 1,000 people in your database and you're calling through and no, we're not doing anything this month or with anything. Okay, great. I'll talk to you next month. And then I would see a deal come through, either a listing or a sale from a competitor. And I'd be like, I just talked to that guy. What am I missing? And this is coming from, I have learned most everything the hard due to my own stubbornness. But so then I was like, all right, you can't just call somebody and say, hey, Larry, you have 20 properties. Do you want to sell any of them? You're going to say no. But if I say, hey, Larry, I'm calling about timber trails. I've got a buyer who might be interested in that property. Is that something that you might consider selling? You're going to say, you know what? We were actually just looking at that one, or not that one, but what about this one over here? It has similar characteristics. And so what I found was that if you're able, as you're going through and doing your prospecting, building your relationships and your farm and all that, you still have to do that. But if you're able to call and talk about a specific property, your hit ratio is going to be significantly higher. So I was using a CRM system that was great, but it only looked in the rearview mirror. It captured all these different data points. And I was like, man, I wish we could use this to look forward. And so that was like the hunch that I had back in like 2018 or 19. And I had a friend come to me and we actually did a podcast here in this room talking about it when we were first going public with it. And he came to me and he said, hey, my partners and I have background in software. We want to invest in commercial real estate. I was like, well, if you guys have background in software, what about this? And I pitched him. I was like, what if you could use data and analytics to predict real estate transactions? And a week later, the three of us, now the founding partners, got together for lunch and they're like, yeah, I think this thing has legs. So what we did is I educated our data team about how the murkiness of commercial real estate. And they started by kicking out Excel spreadsheets of likely sale candidates. And I would pull it up and there was like 20 leads on it per month and 7 or 8 of them would be in play. I would have it listed. I'd be valuing it. A competitor would have it listed. It was under contract. Somehow it was in the active sales funnel. Oh, we're onto something. This is great. So then our thought was we could just go to brokerage houses and say, hey, we have this formula. Let's overlay it onto your data. And then we'll tell you where to call. And we made a couple of those calls and it was like, no, you've got to get your own data. So we've spent the last year building out a platform, and then we have sourced a data feed from a company called Cherry. And what's great is that we have access to every single parcel, But what is a challenge is that you may have a 120 unit property, David, but it might be on 3 parcels. So it's like, how do you sew those things together? Or what's happening recently with condoization, especially in Ohio, or even broken condo projects where it's been reassembled. How do you recognize that 300 individual parcels are actually one property? So that's what we're in the process of sewing up right now. And it's meant to be a dashboard. I'll show you guys a demo later, but we've got all the deals ranked hot, warm, cold, and then contact information, loan information. So yeah, it's pretty exciting.
Great job.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. I think we're about at time. I really appreciate you guys taking some time today to join us, and
A pleasure. Thanks.
thank you so much.
I think we'd like to come back, Stash.
Yes, Stan.
This was a lot of fun.
Good.
Right, Jason?
Actually,
That was a good.
this is the way we're going to do a deal together. We don't know what the deal is, but we will.
I love it.
So,
I love it.
Thanks for letting me tag along.
This was great. I appreciate it. Thank you guys.
Okay.
All right. See you soon, man. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
don't you feel like we're on a plane? I just want to